They called her a mistake, not because of what she did, but because of what she was. In the scattered settlements where Apache and settlers crossed paths, Talasi moved like a shadow no one wanted to acknowledge. Men looked away when she passed. Women whispered. Children pointed before their mothers pulled them close. She had stopped counting the years since her own people told her to leave. The day Silas McAllister found her standing over his dying horse. Neither of them knew that moment would break every rule both had lived by. What he saw in her face that morning would haunt him. What she saw in his eyes would terrify her even more. The horse's labored breathing cut through the desert stillness. Talasi crouched beside the animal, her broad hands moving across its swollen belly with practiced certainty. She had been tracking deer when she heard the distressed sounds carrying across the basin. Now she knelt in the dust outside a weathered ranch house, the horse's pain radiating through its trembling muscles. She sensed him before she saw him. The rancher stood in the doorway of the small barn, rifle lowered but still gripped in both hands. His face held the deep lines of someone who had spent years squinting into harsh sun. Gray threaded through his beard, his eyes fixed on her with an expression she had seen countless times before. That split second where a person tried to reconcile what they were seeing with what they expected to see. "That mare's been suffering since yesterday," he said finally. His voice carried the rough edge of someone unused to speaking. Couldn't figure what was wrong. Talasi kept her focus on the horse. Her fingers found the source of the blockage. The unborn foal positioned wrong. She had delivered dozens of foals in her time with her people, before they decided her presence brought dishonor to their community, before they made it clear that a woman who looked like she did had no place among them. "Foals turned wrong," she said, her voice lower than most women's, another thing people always noticed. "She'll die if it doesn't come out soon." Silas moved closer, his boots scraping against the packed earth. He studied her face, her shoulders, the way her presence seemed to fill more space than it should. She waited for it, the moment his expression would shift from curiosity to discomfort, the moment he would ask her to leave. But he crouched beside her instead. "Can you help her?" The question caught Talasi off guard. Not, "Are you sure?" or, "What are you doing on my land?" Just a simple question about whether she could help. She met his eyes briefly, saw something there she didn't recognize. Not pity, not disgust. Something else entirely. "Yes," she said, "but I need room to work." What neither of them could know was that this moment, her hands working to save life while he watched, would set in motion something neither was prepared for. The mare's survival would create a debt. The debt would require payment, and the payment would demand both of them face exactly what they had been running from. The sun climbed higher as Talasi worked, her strong arms guiding the foal into position. Silas remained nearby, his presence steady but not intrusive. When the foal finally slipped free and took its first shaking breath, something passed between them in the silence. An acknowledgement, a question neither dared ask aloud yet. The foal struggled to stand on wobbling legs. Talasi stepped back, wiping her hands on her worn dress, aware of Silas watching her movements. The mare nuzzled her newborn, and for a moment the only sound was the wind pushing through the dry brush surrounding the property. "You saved them both," Silas said. He rose slowly, his knees cracking from the long crouch. "Most men would have just put the mare down. Most men didn't see what I saw." Talasi moved toward the water trough to rinse her arms. The sun beat against her broad shoulders, and she felt the familiar weight of being observed, studied, judged. Silas picked up a bucket from near the barn. "You have a name?" "Talasi." He nodded, filing it away. "Silas McAllister. This is my land." He gestured vaguely at the expanse of scrub and rock stretching in all directions. "Been here 8 years. Don't get visitors much." She understood what he wasn't saying. Don't get visitors at all. The isolation wasn't accidental. She recognized it because she wore it the same way. A choice made after the world made its position clear. "I should go," she said, though something in her hesitated. The way he looked at her lacked the edge of disgust she had learned to expect. It unsettled her more than hostility would have. "Where?" The question came quick, almost before he meant to ask it. Talasi met his eyes. "Does it matter? I have work that needs doing." Silas set the bucket down with more force than necessary. "Fence lines falling apart. Got lumber, but my back isn't what it was. Pay isn't much, but there's a room in the barn. Clean. Separate." The offer hung between them. Talasi searched his face for the trap she knew had to be there. Men didn't offer women like her work. They offered insults, propositions wrapped in degradation, violence disguised as humor, but his expression held steady, almost defiant, as if he expected her to refuse. Why? She needed to hear him say it. Because you know what you're doing with animals. Because I need help. Because... He stopped, his jaw tightening. Because you saved something that mattered to me when you could have walked past. Talasi felt something shift in her chest, a sensation she had buried so deep she barely recognized it. Hope. Dangerous, foolish hope. She had learned what hope cost. Her tribe had taught her that lesson when they called her unholy, when they said her size and strength were signs of imbalance, when her own mother looked away rather than defend what she had birthed. One season, Talasi said. That's all. One season, Silas agreed. Neither of them acknowledged what they both felt, that this agreement was already more than practical arrangement, that the mare's survival had bound them into something neither could name yet, that the distance Talasi maintained and the careful neutrality in Silas's voice were protection against something that terrified them both. As the sun reached its peak, Talasi followed Silas toward the barn. She noticed how he kept space between them, respectful but not cold, how he didn't flinch when her shadow fell across his path. Small things, things other people wouldn't notice because they had never learned to look for them. But what Talasi didn't see was the rider approaching from the east, dust rising in his wake, and what Silas didn't mention was that tomorrow would bring visitors he had been dreading for months, the kind of visitors who asked questions, the kind who noticed things that didn't fit their understanding of how the world should work. The mare's grateful whinnying followed them into the barn's shade, where the temperature dropped and the smell of hay filled the air, where, for just a moment, both of them could pretend that one season might be enough. The barn room held a narrow cot, a wooden chair, and a small table beneath a window that faced west. Dust motes swirled in the morning light as Talasi set down the few possessions she carried. A knife her father had made before he stopped claiming her as daughter, a blanket woven by hands that had once held hers, a leather pouch containing herbs and medicines she had learned to prepare alone. Silas stood in the doorway. There's coffee on the stove in the house when you're ready. We'll start on the north fence line after you eat. She turned to thank him, but he had already walked away. His boots echoed across the barn floor, that measured pace of someone who moved through his days with precision born from necessity rather than preference. Talasi understood that rhythm. She had developed her own version of it. Wake before dawn, work until exhaustion made thinking impossible, sleep dreamless if sleep came at all. The fence work began in silence. Silas handed her tools without instruction, and she took them without question. They fell into an unspoken pattern, his weathered hands and her strong ones working the same task from different angles. The fence post needed replacing where rot had weakened the wood. Simple work, honest work, the kind that left no room for complicated thoughts. You learn animal medicine from your people? Silas asked after an hour had passed. My grandmother, Talasi said, driving a post deep with 3 solid strikes. Before she died, she taught me. Said someone needed to know even if... She stopped. Even if what? Even if that someone wouldn't be welcome to use it. Silas nodded slowly, his eyes on the horizon. My wife knew remedies too. Learned them from a woman who lived near our old place. His voice carried a weight that made Talasi look up. She died 8 years ago. Her and our son. Birth went wrong. Nothing anyone could do. The confession settled between them like a stone dropping into still water. Talasi felt the ripples of it, understood suddenly why he lived alone, why he had frozen when he saw the mare struggling, why saving the foal had meant more than practical matters. That's why you don't go to town, she said. They have opinions about how I should have moved on by now, about what a man my age should be doing. He drove his post harder than necessary, got tired of hearing them. Before Talasi could respond, a sound carried across the desert, hoofbeats, steady and purposeful. Both of them straightened, hands stilling on their work. 3 riders appeared over the rise, moving directly toward the ranch. Silas's face hardened into something unreadable. Those the visitors you mentioned? Talasi asked, though she already knew. Worse, Silas said quietly. That's Thomas Hendricks. Owns the land east of here. Been trying to buy my property for 5 years. Brings his sons to remind me that he has help and I don't. The riders drew closer, close enough now for Talasi to see their faces. The older man in front sat his horse like someone who had never questioned his right to anything. His sons flanked him, younger copies of the same entitled certainty. All three of them stared at Talassi with the expression she knew too well, the one that measured her against their expectations and found her lacking in ways they would make sure she understood. Thomas Hendricks reined his horse to a stop 20 feet away. His eyes moved from Silas to Talassi and back again, and something in his face shifted from surprise to something colder, more calculating. "McAllister," he said, his voice carrying easy authority. "Didn't expect to find you'd taken on help, especially not." He paused, his gaze raking over Talassi in a way that made her fingers curl into fists. "Especially not that kind of help." Silas stepped forward slightly, a subtle movement that placed him between Hendricks and Talassi. "My land, my business. That's the thing though, isn't it?" Hendricks smiled without warmth. "Everything on your land becomes the business of those of us who have to neighbor it. And some things just don't sit right with folks. Makes people uncomfortable. Makes them ask questions." What those questions were, he didn't need to say. Talassi had heard them all before, in different words, from different mouths, but always carrying the same poison. The suggestion that her presence disrupted something, that she belonged nowhere, that people like her were problems that needed solving. But what terrified her more than Hendricks's barely veiled threats was the way Silas stood his ground, his posture protective, his silence refusing to offer the explanation Hendricks clearly expected, as if defending her was simple, as if it wouldn't cost him everything. "She's helping with the livestock," Silas said, his voice level but firm, same as any hired hand would. Hendricks's eldest son laughed, the sound sharp and mocking. "That ain't no hired hand, Pa. Look at the size of her. Probably scares the horses more than helps them." Talassi's jaw tightened, but she remained still. She had learned long ago that responding to cruelty only fed it, that silence was armor when words became weapons. But something in her chest burned anyway, the old wound that never quite healed. "The mare foaled yesterday," Silas continued, ignoring the comment. "Healthy colt. Wouldn't have happened without her." Hendricks dismounted slowly, his boots hitting the ground with deliberate weight. He walked closer, studying the fence work they had been doing. "Fine craftsmanship," he said, running his hand along the new post. "Shame to waste it on land that's barely producing. My offer still stands. McAllister, 3 times what you paid. Enough to start over somewhere else. Somewhere that suits a man alone better than this empty stretch." "I'm not alone anymore," Silas said. The words hung in the air, their meaning ambiguous enough to be dangerous. Talassi felt the shift immediately. The way Hendricks's sons exchanged glances, the way their father's expression hardened into something vindictive. "That so?" Hendricks turned his full attention to Talassi now, his eyes cold with calculation. "You got papers for her? Work contract signed legal?" "Don't need papers for honest work," Silas said. "See, that's where you're wrong." Hendricks pulled a folded document from his jacket. "New territorial regulations came through last month. Any labor arrangement needs proper documentation, especially when it involves—" He paused meaningfully. "Unusual circumstances. Without papers, she's trespassing. On your land, that makes you liable." Talassi's stomach dropped. She recognized the trap for what it was, legal language twisted to justify what people wanted anyway, a way to make her leaving seem like law rather than prejudice. "I can go," she said quietly to Silas. "It's not worth—" "No." The word came out harder than she expected. Silas stepped closer to Hendricks, his posture rigid. "I'll get the papers drawn up proper. Take them to the land office myself." "That office is 30 miles west," Hendricks said with false concern. 3-day ride there and back. "That's a long time to leave your property unattended, especially with all the problems folks have been having lately. Fences cut, livestock spooked. Real shame what can happen when a man spreads himself too thin." The threat was clear enough. Leave to get the papers, come back to find his ranch destroyed. Stay without papers, give Hendricks grounds to bring the territorial marshal. Either way, Talassi would have to leave. Either way, Silas would stand alone again. "Give me 2 days," Silas said. "I'll have everything legal." Hendricks smiled, knowing he had won regardless of which choice Silas made. 2 days then. But if those papers aren't filed proper, she goes. And maybe we have a longer conversation about whether this land is being used responsibly. He mounted his horse with practiced ease. "Good seeing you, McAllister. Always interesting to catch up with neighbors." The 3 riders turned and headed east, their departure unhurried. They knew time was on their side. knew that the choice they had forced would tear apart whatever fragile arrangement had formed. When they disappeared over the rise, Silas turned to Talassi. "I'm going for those papers. You can't leave the ranch, you heard what he said. And you heard what I said." His voice carried an edge she hadn't heard before. "You stay. You keep working. I'll be back in 3 days with everything legal." "Why?" The question burst out before she could stop it. "Why does it matter? I'm used to leaving. It's what I do. You don't owe me." "Maybe I owe myself," Silas interrupted. "Maybe I'm tired of letting people like Hendricks decide what happens on my land, in my life." He met her eyes fully for the first time since the riders arrived. "Maybe you saved more than a horse yesterday." Talassi felt something crack inside her, the protective wall she had built over years of rejection. She wanted to argue, to make him see that defending her would cost too much. But the determination in his face stopped her words. He had already decided, already chosen a side she never expected anyone to choose. 3 days, she said finally. "Then we both decide what happens next." Silas nodded, but they both knew the decision had already been made. He would ride out at dawn. She would stay and face whatever came during his absence. And when he returned, if he returned to find his ranch still standing, everything would change between them. For better or worse, the line had been crossed. That night, as Talassi lay on the narrow cot listening to the desert wind, she understood that Hendricks had accomplished something more dangerous than any threat. He had forced Silas to declare himself, to choose protection over safety, and in doing so, he had created exactly the situation both she and Silas had spent years avoiding. The possibility of connection, the risk of loss, the terrible hope that someone might actually stay. Dawn broke cold and clear. Talassi stood near the corral as Silas loaded his saddlebags, checking the supplies with methodical precision. He moved like a man preparing for battle rather than a simple ride to the land office. She understood why. They both knew Hendricks would be watching. Waiting for the moment, Silas left the property vulnerable. "The shotgun's in the house," Silas said without looking at her. "Loaded. Extra shells in the cabinet above the stove. I won't need it." "Probably not." He tightened the cinch on his saddle. "But if Hendricks's sons show up while I'm gone, don't try to reason with them. Don't try to explain. Just make sure they understand you're not alone and helpless." Talassi watched him work, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands checked each strap twice. "You're afraid they'll hurt me. I'm afraid they'll try." He finally met her eyes. "And I'm afraid what you'll do if they succeed, what it'll cost you." The admission struck deeper than she expected. He wasn't just worried about her physical safety. He was worried about her spirit, about what another violation would do to the fragile trust she had allowed herself to feel. That awareness, that he saw past her strength to the wounds beneath, made her throat tighten. "I've survived worse than Hendricks's sons," she said. "I know." Silas pulled the reins through his hands, testing their length. "That's what bothers me, that you've had to." He swung into the saddle, his horse dancing slightly beneath him. The early light caught the gray in his beard, made him look older and more tired than the day they met. Talassi realized suddenly how much weight he carried alone, how long he had carried it, how choosing to defend her meant adding her burden to his own. "Silas," she stepped closer to the horse, "when you come back, if you come back and find me gone, don't blame yourself. Some things can't be fixed with papers. I'm not trying to fix you," he said quietly. "I'm trying to stop letting fear make my decisions." With that, he touched his hat and rode west. Talassi watched until he disappeared into the morning haze, then turned back to the ranch. The work wouldn't stop because he was gone. The animals needed feeding. The fence line needed finishing. Life continued regardless of the storms building on the horizon. She worked through the morning without pause, her hands finding comfort in familiar tasks. The mare and foal both looked strong, the little one already running circles around its mother. She repaired a broken stall door, mucked out the barn, hauled water from the well. Physical labor that kept her mind from wandering to dangerous places, from imagining what could go wrong, from wondering if Silas would actually return. Midday came with crushing heat. Talassi filled a bucket and poured water over her head, letting it run down her face and neck. The coolness brought brief relief from the sun's assault. She was bent over, catching her breath, when she heard the horses, 3 of them, coming from the east. Talassi straightened slowly, water dripping from her hair. The Hendricks sons appeared over the rise, riding in a loose formation that suggested confidence rather than caution. They reined up at the edge of the property, close enough to be seen clearly, but far enough to maintain deniability if accusations came later. The eldest, Wade, she had heard his father call him, spoke first. "Heard your employer rode out early. Long trip to the land office." Talasi didn't respond. She set the bucket down carefully and wiped her hands on her dress, keeping her movements deliberate and calm. "Thing is," Wade continued, his horse stepping closer, "we're not sure he's coming back. Pa says sometimes men get to thinking on a long ride, start remembering all the reasons they lived alone in the first place, all the complications that just aren't worth the trouble." His brothers laughed, the sound rehearsed and cruel. They had done this before, Talasi realized. This dance of intimidation, these carefully chosen words that skirted direct threat while making intention perfectly clear. "So we thought we'd stop by," Wade said. "Neighborly-like. Make sure you understood your options. Save everyone some difficulty." Talasi met his eyes steadily. "I understand my options. Do you?" The younger brother spoke now, his voice carrying mockery. "Because from where we sit, you got exactly one. Pack whatever you're carrying and move on before Pa decides to make things official. File complaints with the territorial marshal. Questions about what you're really doing here. What kind of arrangement you got with McAllister that needs hiding." The insinuation was clear, designed to wound in ways physical violence couldn't, to suggest that any connection between her and Silas must be degrading, shameful, something that needed darkness to exist. Talasi felt rage building in her chest, hot and familiar. She had swallowed this poison her entire life, had learned to let it pass through her without showing damage. But something had shifted in the past 2 days, something about the way Silas had looked at her, the way he had chosen defense over safety. It had cracked open a door she had kept locked, and now fury poured through. "Get off this land," she said, her voice low and hard. Wade's smile widened. "That's the spirit. Show us that famous temper. Make it easier for Pa to convince the marshal you're dangerous, that McAllister needs protecting from his own poor judgment." They wanted her to attack, wanted her to give them the justification they needed. Talasi understood the trap because she had fallen into it before, when she was younger, when she still believed violence could answer insult, when she hadn't yet learned that people like the Hendricks brothers won either way, by provoking her rage or by crushing her silence. But what they didn't see was the mare moving nervously in the corral behind them. What they didn't hear was the creaking of wood under pressure. What they didn't notice was that their horses, spooked by the tension in the air, had backed toward the weakest section of fence, the section that Silas hadn't yet had time to repair. The fence gave way with a sharp crack. Wade's horse reared, throwing him sideways into the dirt. His brothers shouted, fighting to control their own spooked animals as the broken rails scattered across the ground. The mare in the corral whinnied in alarm, her foal pressing against her side. Talasi moved without thinking. She grabbed the nearest horse's bridle, her strong hand steadying the animal before it could bolt or trample Wade where he lay stunned. The horse settled under her grip, its panic easing as she spoke low words in Apache, sounds her grandmother had taught her long ago. Wade scrambled to his feet, his face red with humiliation. Dust covered his shirt and hat. His brothers had managed to control their mounts, but barely. They stared at Talasi with expressions caught between anger and something else, something that looked almost like grudging respect. "You could have let him fall worse," the younger brother said, his voice lacking its earlier mockery. "Could have," Talasi agreed. She released the horse's bridle and stepped back. "Didn't." Wade brushed himself off with rough movements, his pride clearly more damaged than his body. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. The dynamic had shifted in that moment of rescue. The script they had rehearsed, intimidation, threats, driving her away, no longer fit the situation. "That fence was rotted through," Talasi said quietly. "Your father knew it. That's why he mentioned accidents, why he wanted Silas gone when it collapsed, so he could claim negligence." The brothers exchanged glances. Wade's jaw tightened as understanding dawned. They had been tools in their father's scheme without realizing it, sent to provoke trouble at the exact spot where trouble was guaranteed to find them. "He wouldn't," Wade started, but stopped. Because of course their father would. They knew him well enough to recognize his methods even if they had never questioned them before. "Go home," Talasi said. "Tell him the fence fell. Tell him nobody got hurt. Tell him whatever you need to tell him." "And if we come back?" the middle brother asked, though his tone had lost its edge. Then you come back, Talasi said simply. But not like this. Not with words meant to cut. Not as your father's weapons. Wade gathered his horse's reins. His face worked through several emotions before settling on something harder to read. Not quite apology. Not quite acceptance. But perhaps the beginning of questions he had never thought to ask before. They rode away slowly, their earlier swagger gone. Talasi watched them disappear over the rise, then turned to survey the broken fence. The damage was worse than she had thought. The entire section would need replacing, not just repair. Hours of work, maybe a full day. Work that would leave her vulnerable if Hendricks returned with different tactics. With men less conflicted than his sons, she spent the afternoon hauling lumber and digging new post holes. The physical labor helped quiet the shaking that had started in her hands after the brothers left. The adrenaline of confrontation leaking away into exhaustion. She kept expecting to see more riders, kept listening for the sound of approaching threats. But only the wind came, hot and relentless across the empty land. As the sun began its descent, Talasi allowed herself to stop, to sit on the porch of the house, Silas's house, though he had never explicitly forbidden her from entering it. Her muscles ached. Sweat dried on her skin, leaving salt streaks. She closed her eyes and let herself feel the bone-deep weariness that came not just from work, but from constantly bracing against the world's judgment. A sound made her eyes snap open. Horse hooves. Single rider. Coming fast from the west. Talasi stood, her heart suddenly pounding. Too soon for Silas to return unless he had ridden through the night without stopping. Unless something had gone wrong. Unless he had turned back for reasons she didn't want to consider. The rider crested the rise as the sun touched the horizon. Silas, dust-covered and clearly exhausted, but riding hard. He saw her on the porch, and something in his posture shifted. Relief maybe, or recognition of what his absence had cost. He dismounted before his horse fully stopped, his legs unsteady from days in the saddle. In his hand, he clutched a leather document case. 3 days, she said. You made it in 2. Rode through last night. His voice was rough from dust and fatigue. Couldn't stop thinking about what might happen if I took the full time. His eyes found the broken fence, the fresh post holes, the evidence of what had occurred. What did I miss? Talasi felt something give way inside her. The wall she had maintained, the distance she had promised herself she would keep. It crumbled under the weight of his concern, his exhaustion, his refusal to abandon what he had started. She opened her mouth to explain about the Hendricks brothers, about the fence, about how she had handled it. But what came out instead was something she hadn't planned. Why did you come back? The words emerged raw and unguarded. You got the papers. You could have sent them. Could have written that you sold the land. Could have run. Silas finished. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the dust in his beard, the sunburn on his neck, the way his eyes held hers without wavering. Yeah, I could have. Same way you could have left the moment I rode out. Same way you could have walked past my mare instead of stopping to help. That's different. Is it? He set the document case on the porch rail. Because from where I stand, we're both doing the same thing. Choosing to stay when leaving would be easier. Choosing to trust when trust has only ever hurt us before. Talasi felt tears burning behind her eyes. A sensation she had forbidden herself for so long that experiencing it now felt like physical pain. She turned away, ashamed of the weakness. Ashamed that his words had found the exact place where her armor was thinnest. But Silas moved around to face her again, and what she saw in his expression stopped the tears before they could fall. Not pity, not discomfort at her emotion, just steady recognition. The look of someone who understood exactly what it cost to lower defenses, who knew that vulnerability was the bravest thing either of them could offer. Tell me what happened while I was gone, he said quietly. Then we'll figure out what comes next. Together, they sat on the porch as darkness gathered. Talasi's words coming slowly at first, then faster as she described the confrontation with Hendricks's sons. Silas listened without interrupting, his face growing harder as she explained the trap that had been set. The fence that was meant to fail, the calculations behind every move. Wade could have been badly hurt, Silas said when she finished. Hendricks was willing to risk his own son to push me out. He knew I would help, Talasi said. Knew I couldn't watch someone fall and do nothing. He was counting on it. To what end? To make me look dangerous. To give them a reason to remove me by force if needed. She pulled her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. But Wade saw it. saw what his father was doing. I don't think he'll come back like that again. Silas was quiet for a long moment, his gaze on the horizon where the last light was fading. When I was riding back, he said finally, I kept thinking about what my life looked like 2 days ago, then 3 days ago, then 8 years ago. He paused, started wondering when I stopped living and just started surviving. When I decided safety was worth more than anything else. Safety keeps you alive, Talasi said. Does it? He turned to look at her. Because I've been safe for 8 years, been alone and protected and careful, and I've been dying anyway, just slower, in ways that don't leave marks people can see. Talasi felt her throat tighten. She knew exactly what he meant, had lived the same slow dying, the same careful preservation of something that wasn't quite life, the same calculation that isolation hurt less than rejection. I'm scared, she said, the admission costing more than anything she had shared before. Every time someone looks at me the way you do, like I'm something more than what they see, I wait for the moment it changes. For the moment they realize their mistake, for the disgust to replace whatever else was there. And when does that moment come? Always. The word came out broken. It always comes. Silas shifted closer, close enough that she could feel the heat from his body in the cooling night air. My wife used to say I thought too much, that I could logic myself out of anything, including happiness. He smiled sadly at the memory. She was right. I spent our whole marriage half expecting her to leave, to wake up and see that I was just a man with a failing ranch and not much else to recommend me. And then she died, and I convinced myself that fear had been justified. That loss was inevitable, so why risk it again? What changed? Talasi asked. You saved my mare. He said it simply, as if that explained everything. And then you stayed. And then you didn't leave when Hendrix gave you every reason to. And somewhere in all that, I realized that I had already risked everything, that the moment I offered you work, the moment I rode out to get those papers, I had already chosen you over safety. Talasi felt the tears come now, hot and unstoppable. Years of holding them back made their release almost violent. She tried to turn away, but Silas's hand found hers, his rough fingers closing around her palm with a gentleness that broke something fundamental inside her. Everyone who has ever seen me, she said through the tears, her voice shaking, has found me lacking. My own mother looked away. My tribe called me cursed. Men have laughed. Women have whispered. Children have pointed. And I learned to accept it. Learned that this, she gestured at herself, at her size, her features, everything she had been told, was wrong, would never be enough, could never be wanted. You're wrong, Silas said quietly. How can you? Because I see you. He squeezed her hand tighter. Not what other people told you to be. Not what you think you should apologize for. I see someone who saved a life when she could have walked away. Who stayed to face threats alone rather than run. Who built fence and mucked stalls and didn't ask for thanks or recognition. I see strength that most men would envy. I see competence. I see. He paused, his voice dropping lower. I see exactly what I want. The words hung between them, weighted with meaning that went beyond simple declaration. Talasi looked at him through tear-blurred vision and saw his face holding nothing but truth. No calculation, no ulterior motive, just raw honesty that cost him as much as her tears cost her. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. How to be what you think I am. You don't have to be anything except what you already are. Silas reached up slowly, telegraphing his movement, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. His hand touched her face, his thumb brushing away tears with infinite care. You just have to be willing to stay, to see what happens if neither of us runs. Talasi leaned into his touch despite every instinct screaming that this would end badly. That hope was dangerous, that letting someone see her cry was the ultimate vulnerability. But his hand remained steady against her cheek, and his eyes never wavered from hers, and something inside her made a choice that terrified her more than any confrontation ever had. She chose to trust him. I'll stay, she said, her voice barely audible, for as long as you'll have me. Then you'll be here a long time, Silas said, because I'm not letting you go. They sat like that as full dark descended, his hand on her face, hers gripping his other hand like it was the only solid thing in a world that had never stopped shifting beneath her feet. Neither of them acknowledged that this was the moment from the thumbnail, the moment where vulnerability met acceptance, where two people who had survived alone discovered that surviving together might actually mean living, But dawn would bring new challenges. Hendricks wouldn't accept defeat easily. The papers Silas carried would protect them legally, but law and justice weren't always the same thing in isolated territory. And the choice they had made tonight, to stand together despite everything that made it impractical, dangerous, and complicated, would be tested in ways neither of them could predict. For now, though, they had this: the desert night, the sound of each other's breathing, and the fragile, terrifying possibility that they had both finally found someone worth the risk. Morning came with the sound of many horses. Talassi woke on the barn cot to find Silas already outside, standing in front of the house with the document case under his arm. She moved to the doorway and counted 7 riders approaching from the east. Hendricks led them, his posture radiating controlled fury. "This ends now, McAllister," Hendricks called out while still 20 feet away. "My sons told me everything. You've got that woman working here without proper cause, using her to intimidate neighbors. That fence incident could have been serious." Silas waited until all 7 riders had stopped before speaking. "The fence incident happened because you sent your sons to provoke trouble at a section you knew was weak." His voice carried across the morning air with absolute certainty. "Wade knows it. Your other boys know it. And now everyone here knows it." Hendricks's face reddened. "That's a bold accusation from a man harboring someone of questionable..." "Questionable what?" Silas interrupted. "Character? She saved your son from serious injury. Could have let him fall. Could have let the horses bolt. Didn't." He opened the document case and pulled out folded papers. "As for legality, I've got work contracts filed with the Territorial Land Office. Signed. Witnessed. Everything proper." The riders behind Hendricks shifted uncomfortably. These weren't his sons. They were hired hands from neighboring properties, men who worked for wages and had no particular loyalty to Hendricks beyond payment. Men who could see the situation wasn't what they had been told it would be. "A contract doesn't change what she is," Hendricks said, his voice dropping to something uglier. "Doesn't change that she's a..." "Careful." Silas's tone cut like a blade. "Next words out of your mouth determine whether we stay neighbors or whether I file formal complaints about harassment, intimidation, and attempted sabotage with the territorial marshal." Talassi stepped out of the barn fully now, moving to stand beside Silas. She felt the eyes of all 7 riders on her, measuring, judging, calculating. But Silas didn't flinch or create distance. He stood his ground beside her as if her presence strengthened, rather than weakened his position. "She stays," Silas said clearly. "On my land, doing work she's good at. And if you've got problems with that, take them up with the land office, or the marshal, or anyone else you want. But take them somewhere else. You're not welcome here anymore." The silence stretched tight. Hendricks's jaw worked as he processed the situation. His hired hands were already looking away, clearly uncomfortable with whatever justifications he had used to bring them. His sons had seen through his manipulations, and Silas had legal protection that would make any direct action costly. "You're making a mistake," Hendricks said finally, "choosing her over practical sense, over your own future." "No," Silas said quietly. "I made my mistake 8 years ago when I let fear decide everything. When I chose isolation over risk. When I convinced myself that safety mattered more than living." He glanced at Talassi, his expression holding something she had never seen directed at her before. Complete acceptance. Total certainty. "She's not my mistake. She's the first right choice I've made in longer than I can remember." Hendricks made a disgusted sound and yanked his horse's reins. "You'll regret this, McAllister. Both of you." "Maybe," Silas agreed. "But I'll regret it together instead of alone. That's worth something." The riders turned and headed east, leaving dust in their wake. Talassi watched them disappear, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. When they were finally gone, she turned to Silas. "You just made an enemy of your closest neighbor," she said. "Had him as an enemy already," Silas replied. "Just stopped pretending otherwise." He set the document case down and faced her fully. "Question is whether you still want to stay, after seeing what choosing you costs." Talassi looked at the ranch spread out before them. The repaired fence, the barn where she had found temporary shelter that had become something more, the house that Silas had built with his own hands and filled with 8 years of careful loneliness. She thought about her life before this, the constant movement, the endless rejection, the way she had learned to expect nothing because hope hurt too much when it was crushed. "I want to stay," she said. "Not because you defended me, not because you got papers filed, but because when you look at me, you see someone I've never seen in myself, someone worthy of defense, of choice, of—" She stopped, the word catching. "Of love," Silas finished quietly. "You can say it. I am." The tears came again, but gentler this time. Not the violent release of years of pain, but something softer, something that felt almost like healing. Silas pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her broad frame without hesitation or awkwardness. She towered over him slightly, outweighed him by a considerable amount, and none of it mattered. He held her like she was exactly what he wanted, exactly what he had been missing. "They'll talk," she whispered against his shoulder. "In town, at the trading post, everywhere. Let them talk," Silas said. "We'll be too busy living to listen." They stood like that as the sun climbed higher. Two people who had survived alone discovering that they were stronger together. The mare and her foal watched from the corral, the younger one testing its legs with increasing confidence. New life, born from near tragedy. A fitting metaphor for what was beginning here. The work would continue. Fences would need mending. Seasons would change. Challenges would come from neighbors who shared Hendrix's views, or from simple survival in harsh territory. But they would face it together now. Two outsiders who had found in each other what the world had refused to give them: recognition, acceptance, and the revolutionary idea that they were both exactly enough as they were. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale from the frontier, where unexpected connections and quiet courage reveal what it truly means to be seen. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.